Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessica Philippe. I'm the Member Engagement Librarian at South Central Regional Library Council in Ithaca, New York. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar on building trust and student empowerment through assessment. This webinar is brought to you by I2 New York and the Empire State Library Network Assessment Initiative. And the Empire State Library Network, or ESLN, for those of you who don't know, is the former NY3R's organization. And if you'd like more information about the organization, you can go to their website at www.esln.org. So during today's presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat box. But just be aware that they'll only be visible to us organizers, but your input today is encouraged. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, Barbara Stripling. Barbara is a former ALA president. She is the former director of school library programs in New York City, and she's the current senior associate dean and assistant professor at the School of Information Studies in Syracuse. So thank you for joining us, Barbara.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here today. The reason why this particular webinar is so important to me is that I think we are undercutting the whole idea of assessment by thinking of it only in terms of accountability. Assessment has a lot of negative connotation, and so I started thinking about, well, what is it about assessment that is a positive thing for librarians, teachers, and students? What I'm going to share with you today, and hope you share with me as well, is thinking about how to really use assessment to build trust between librarians and students, and it's a two-way trust. So we're going to talk about it. I don't have all the answers. I'm exploring my own thinking. I hope this is a community, a conversation where we can build our own ideas and then maybe really change the way that we do assessment. The main point, obviously, is that assessment is a conversation. It shouldn't be a dead end where students turn something in, they get a grade, and then they go on and they never think about it again. That conversation can be used to build trust. And when we're thinking about that, we have to figure out why is it that we assess and how do we assess. Both of those will impact the way that we can build trust. I thought I would start maybe with the conversation with you. What assessment situations have you experienced when you felt that students trusted you, and why? What is it that you've been able to accomplish in assignments, in formative assessment, that you think builds trust and students trust you to assess the right things to enable them to be successful? So if you would just write some comments in the chat box and we'll share briefly.
I hope you're all typing here.
Oh, and that I am absolutely seeing part of it is where you become a partner with the students in assessment. And so when you're recording their book reviews, you're enabling them to share. So Judy, I totally agree with that. Oh yes, and Matt, when students have input, because they are able to exercise choice and exercise their own decision making and get assessments that allow them to show their strengths, which is one of the main problems I have with some kinds of assessment, that it's designed to show their weaknesses rather than their strengths. Oh, game-like assessments, absolutely. And that's another aspect of assessment, that they trust you that assessment is not punitive, but you can actually learn during the assessment and enjoy yourself. I had to teach the teachers and students at the same time, and we were all learning together. Very nice, where assessment is joint learning, and students trust you to be a fellow learner, and to recognize that maybe teachers aren't the whole authority, and that we can all have a conversation about learning together. Matt is saying further why students are doing the project they are doing and giving them a choice to show what they learned and what their experts had. Absolutely. I felt students trusted me when they accomplished something and completed an assignment successfully. I like to celebrate their accomplishments so they could be proud of what they did. And that is absolutely right, Megan, that if we design assessments so that, and then support them so that they can be successful, they need to trust us that we're going to lift them to the level where they can feel successful, be successful, and then we celebrate their success. Mary Ellen talked about the power of reflection and reflection questions. And that gets to something we're going to be talking about, where the assessment itself enables students to think. And then a rubric-based assessment of performance is more enjoyable. I absolutely agree because students it needs to be transparent. They need to know what it is that they need to demonstrate. I like to have the students teach the teacher, Matt says, and I totally agree. How joyous for kids to be able to be teachers as well as students. This is a good comment, Judy. The trust building begins prior to assessment, and that it's based on a relationship with students, and they therefore will allow us to experiment on different assessments because they trust us because of that relationship. And the idea of having the rubric ahead of time is exactly right. So the second question I had on there was the assessment situations that may have caused a deterioration of trust. And I think probably the opposite of what you have been commenting on is exactly how we cause a deterioration of trust. If it seems to be punitive, if it seems to be a gotcha situation, where the expectations are not clear, where students have absolutely no choice, where the assessment doesn't actually build on the learning, it seems to come out of left field and students have no idea where did that come from. State exams are the exact example, Matt, and I totally agree. And actually, it's this exam mentality that caused me to start thinking about the whole idea of trust. Because I like assessment. I like for students to be able to share their learning, to continue their learning through assessment. And I feel personally that the state exams are designed to show what students don't know. And that to me does not build trust, plus the fact that they aren't transparent and that they don't see the results in a timely way and there's no building on them. And Judy brings up a good point. I think librarians are sometimes responsible for administering the state exams, and that does break trust. So I guess our only hope is that we're invisible administrators, that students don't actually know that we're responsible for administering them. Because when you have to do a test, you really have no control over what is in the assessment. And so that puts us in a difficult situation. In some instances, what would break trust would be accelerated reader quizzes, especially for students who struggle with reading at grade level. That's Mary Ellen. I agree with you. We certainly don't want to give assessments that make students show what they can't do or cause them to compare themselves with somebody else in an unfavorable light. The next thing that I wanted to ask you, and I only have two of these at the beginning, but I really wanted to get us started thinking about it, is what assessment situations have you experienced when you trusted students to do well? And why? A performance task such as a presentation, absolutely, because you've built that up over time. I agree with you, Megan. And the chance for them to shine, and we trust them because we've supported them to develop the performance. Authentic tasks that I know I've taught them how to do. And there's two things there. We've supported them to learn how to do it. This is Beth. But also the fact that they're authentic. It's not something that isn't grounded in what is important to learn, grounded in the real world, and something that they can be invested in. We're going to talk about authenticity more in just a minute. Judy comments about that she's given first graders the Chromebooks and let them go around the library and find a quiet spot to record, which is a wonderful thing to do, to give them that time to create and the space so that they can listen to their own muse, as it were. Matt says, when I give them a lot of preparation and show models through video of other students doing the same type of assessment. Models are important, and if we structure it right, they're not going to be copying the model, which is what people always fear, but they're going to have an idea of what they can do. Give them a chance to explore their interests. Kenneth Roman. It comes back to the student's choice of what to work on and what to create a project on. And we know that if they are interested in the project, we can trust them to do the best they can because we know they're going to get invested in it. It's when they don't see any relation to their own life or what they're interested in or why they might need to learn something that we're going to get that resistance, and we can't really trust that they're going to invest in it. And Kara also talked about the power of choice, whether it's for a specific topic or for the way that they're going to present the information. Yes, and Kristen also talks about the power of students being invested in it and they become excited to complete it. And she also brings in the idea of tapping into their love of using computers and iPads, so giving them the support to use different kinds of technology and making it available taps into that interest in technology, but they're not just learning how to use technology, they're actually empowered to use the technology to create and accomplish something that they're interested in. So the reverse of that is, what types of assessment cause you to lose trust in your students? And it could be exactly the reverse of what we've been talking about. Certainly, if we end up in a situation where we have to give these standardized tests and we know students are going to resist it, well, we don't trust them to be engaged or invested in it, and I actually don't trust students to do their best. It is when I can connect to their interests that I trust them to know that they're going to invest the time and the energy and the intellectual engagement that will enable them to succeed. and the whole idea of I've never lost trust in my students, just the assessments. Good for you, Judy. That's the best answer of all. Multiple choice only teaches students how to take a test and not real skills. So there's something for us to learn there. We talked previously about authentic assessment. So it could be the type of assessment that we offer will enable us to trust more that students are going to engage and to actually be able to demonstrate their learning and want to demonstrate their learning. So we need to think about what are the types of assessment that we can offer. I wanted to first talk some about why you assess and how that can build trust. And so I did some research into how do you build trust, not necessarily connected to assessment, but I will connect it to assessment. The first thing is students can trust librarians to clearly articulate the learning goals, because trust is built through clear intent. And librarians can trust students when they commit to working toward learning goals. So if we have clear learning goals, we can know that students are committed to that. They demonstrate interest, they demonstrate commitment, and that's going to build trust on both sides. We can expect there's trust built when we expect each student to reach the learning goals, and you all talked about that. It's the idea of positive intent. If we go into the assessment with the idea that we're going to provide support and that every single student is going to reach the learning goal by the amount of support and the options for different types of presentations, that's going to build trust with our students. And then if we exhibit self-confidence that indeed every one of you can succeed at that, and I'm going to help you until you get there, that demonstrates positive intent and enables us to trust our students to get there. Our students will trust us if we teach the skills necessary for them to perform well. And so the skills that we teach need to be authentic. They need to actually connect to what we're expecting them to do and connect to the content learning as well. And then librarians can trust students if we can make sure that they are able to apply these skills to real life. So for me, that authentic lens is a huge way that I build trust in my students, when I can know that they will be able to use those skills in other subject areas, in their own lives, in the future. That makes that authenticity pop for me and allows me to trust students that they will recognize the importance of this skill. Students build trust when we support each student to ensure that they're reaching success, and that's setting up those ideas of excellence. What does excellence look like? Now, we do need to reward and support effort, but we also need to help each student reach that high level of performance. That's when we can really celebrate that they have reached excellence. And we need to build trust with our students that they're going to let us know if they don't understand what excellence looks like, or if they're struggling along the way. So that's that open conversation that is so important with our students. How we assess also builds trust, and we've already started talking about that in a lot of ways. The criteria need to be transparent. We talked about rubrics beforehand. That's essential in any type of assessment. And, whoops, there we go. And indeed, the it helps us trust our students, because when we set out those criteria very clearly, it's clear to us when they are reaching and meeting the criteria. So it needs to be transparent beforehand, both for the students and for the librarian or teacher. Having it transparent also allows us to apply criteria consistently. You know how awful it is if students feel like we're not being fair, that we're not being consistent. Well, for this student, we applied it this way. For this, we applied it another way. That will destroy trust. And we can trust if we are sure that we maintain high standards through everything that students are expected to do. So we set a standard of excellence, and we maintain that standard for every assignment. Of course, it'll vary some by the assignment, but it's still that high bar of excellence that we're going to help them reach. We build trust with students by having a dialogue with students so that it's not a one and done. You turn it in and then we never talk about it again, but that we give students a chance to maybe submit a draft, or we give feedback, and then on the next assignment they have a chance to build on it, to ask questions, to do better. That dialogue is important for us as well to maintain trust. We need to have that feedback. We need to ask them questions. Is this working for you? Is this too complex? Do you need more support? How are you feeling about this? All of those questions are important as we work through the assessment. I do think we also need to recognize effort and a willingness to revise. Oh, I just said it's not a one chance and you're out situation. So we need to reward perseverance. That is certainly a disposition that is in the national standards. And recognizing when students will commit to that effort, and students will trust us if we give them a chance to demonstrate that effort and recognize their commitment. So it's not just maybe the final grade, but it is that you've done 3 drafts and you also get credit for that. And certainly as librarians, we will recognize that when we see that demonstration of commitment and effort, and that we recognize that students are willing to do that. And then it turns around, when we recognize it, then they're going to be more willing to demonstrate that effort. And finally, how we assess can build trust for students when we express understanding about the difficulty of the learning. That doesn't mean we reduce the expectations for the learning, but it means we understand that it is difficult, that we will provide support as they go along. We empathize with the difficulty. We all have difficulty in learning new things. And when we're learning alongside our students, that enables us to empathize and provide support. And librarians then can trust students when we're able to express and hear from them that this was tough, but by gum, I did it. And it was hard learning, it was complex, but oh, am I ever proud. And librarians who demonstrate their pride that their students have gone through this very difficult learning situation, but they have come out very successfully. That builds a trust just by the way that we conduct our assessment. So I've talked about assessment as being a conversation that empowers students, and there were really 2 major aspects that I think about. when I think about assessment. The assessment itself should provoke thinking. I will talk more about that, but it doesn't empower students if we have an assessment that just causes them to memorize things and spit them back. What that does is it rewards those who have better memories, who have special tricks for remembering things. I know I used that all the way through, figuring out acronyms so I could remember things. But when the assessment itself empowers students to think, and think while they're doing the assessment, it gives everybody the opportunity to succeed. And we find that assessment can also motivate learning. If they want to do the assessment itself and create a new video or do a presentation, that is very motivating. It gives them a chance to share and to shine. So just briefly then, I wanted to ask your input on the characteristics of assessments that empower students and why you think that is. Now, you all have a lot of background in assessment. You've tried a number of different types of assessment. So what was it that caused an assessment to just explode with student empowerment and explode in motivating students and in provoking their thinking? So what I'm really talking about here, and I assume you all are writing, is putting power in the hands of students. So Matt talks about the student creates something unique. Oh, wonderful. The student is vested in the project where they have a chance to be successful and to create their own thing. Judy talks about the power of student choice. And I absolutely agree. All the research shows the power of choice. Ooh, just a minute. Going off the screen. Just a minute. A way to express who they are. Oh, now that's an interesting idea. That personal connection, the choice enables them to express themselves as well as what they know. The idea of creation, when students have a chance, Kenneth talks about when I have students create something with the information that they learned. And so that's the same idea that Matt was talking about, really, the idea of students creating something unique that they can't copy it. They're creating it based on what they know. Anytime you can have students make audio or video recordings of themselves individually or in teams is always successful. Mary Ellen, I totally agree with you that they want to be able to present, and the power of audio or video recordings is the fact that they can redo it if they mess up. So what they are showing is their best performance. It's not where they're doing a presentation, which is also empowering, but it's even more empowering if they have a chance to redo before they share it. The student has a choice in what to create. Keep choice in mind because that is so important. Just a minute, they're going faster than I am. Engaging, interactive, and open-ended as opposed to multiple choice, which limits what they can do. They can't go very far with multiple choice. You have 4 choices and only one is right. Kristen, I agree with you. Open-ended, so you can do it through a test and maybe do some multiple choice if you just want to get knowledge, but the empowering piece is when they are open-ended answers. So Megan suggested that, and it does give students a chance to work on their level, as you say, so every student can shine because there's not just one right answer. And Matt says, I agree with the who they are statement. I think students integrate the learning into their identity, and it comes out of their identity, kind of a growth process. Isn't that a beautiful way to think of assessment? And that is very empowering. If you think back on the assessments that you did as a student way back, what I remember are the projects that I got to choose what I got to do, and I got to work on it hard enough and long enough that I became an expert, and then I got to share it as an expert. I was the class expert on one particular thing. And so I reach all the way back to 5th grade when I was the class expert on Kansas. And you could ask me anything about Kansas, and I was the expert because I got to do a project. Now, 5th grade was a long time ago for me, but I still remember that feeling of being an expert on something. And then Megan said it appeals to all learning styles. And that's absolutely right. And that's one reason why we build in choice in presentation style as well as the project. And integrating technology sometimes really appeals to some students more than others, so giving those options. And sort of the reverse of that is power in the hands of teachers. We've talked about multiple choice tests. We've talked about controlling so that students have no choice. Sometimes it's difficult to offer choices, so we can't always just open up to any kind of a choice. It may be you can choose this or this, but still that opens it up, and it's not putting the power in the hands of the teacher. I think also the idea of students being able to work on their own level and to their own interests take that power into students' hands, and when you remove that, when there's only one right way to do something, that puts the power in the hands of the teacher. I wanted to talk a little bit about authentic assessment. I've alluded to it before. There really is there's a body of research about authentic assessment. And I remember I got very interested in that early in my career. It has actually formed my ideas about assessment throughout my career. There are 3 characteristics that make something authentic assessment. One is what we would expect, that it connects to a real-world application. So when you're asking students to do projects, it's not just an assignment, but often we can cast it in a scenario where there's a real-world aspect to it. The second is what you all were commenting on, that the assessment itself involves thinking. It's not just copying an answer from somewhere, even maybe from previous thinking that they've done, but they have to think while they're doing the assessment itself. That's very empowering, and we can design that in to the types of assessments that we give. And the third is that it requires disciplined inquiry. And what that essentially means is that there is a process for creating the assessment. It's not just bloop and it's done, but that they are asking questions. They are following this disciplined process to dig into the subject and actually complete the assessment. I urge you, if you're interested, to do more reading on authentic assessment. It opened doors for me that I have gone through for the rest of my life. I just find authentic assessment to be really my pivot point when I think about assessment. There's another way that we can empower students, and that is assessment that is conducted throughout the learning process. A lot of the assessment we have been talking about was summative assessment that occurs at the end of the learning. But we also can do diagnostic assessment and formative assessment. Now I think about, I have my model of inquiry there, but mostly as a learning process, that anytime you're going to start learning something, you have to connect to it. You have to understand, what is my interest in it, what's my background, what do I already know, what do I want to pursue, and then ask questions. So at that point, it's a very good idea to do diagnostic assessment so that students aren't simply repeating what they already know, so that we can help them build on, well, I already know this about this topic, now what do I want to know? I certainly have had the experience of working with students in the library, and they have to do a quote-unquote report, which is the bane of my existence, and they come in and they say, well, I want to pick some, I already know about this, so I want to do it on this. And it really does take a trick to do maybe on the fly diagnostic assessment to push them into, well, what do you already know? Now what questions do you have? And to lift them to the next level. Formative assessment, I think we do a lot in the library. I know I think about it a lot, because what we do is we teach skills that are integral to the content learning, to the whole process of inquiry or research or a learning project that they are working on. And we have to know if they can do those skills as we develop them. Because if nobody understands that they're not evaluating their sources, and they get all the way over to Express and all they've used are worthless sources, then they will have failed on the back end, and we could stop that right during the process by doing some formative assessment. And then finally, summative assessment. I really think that students flourish when they're given a chance to do all three kinds of assessment in a learning process. And particularly, I don't think it's good to just teach a skill, assess, do formative only. It's very nice if it can build to a summative assessment where they have a chance to shine and to create and to develop their own unique projects, which is mostly what we were talking about. So diagnostic assessment, I said, happens before learning. And you can do it in a number of ways. I suggested a few. I'm sure you have your own techniques. You can do it through a multiple choice test. What do you already know? So that when you start the learning, you aren't repeating it. Certainly you can do an interest survey. What interests you most about the Civil War? Well, maybe that's what you want to do your project on. Personal self-reflection. How do you feel about these different types of learning? What do you think about creating a video? Maybe even. You can determine that right at the beginning. What do you already know about tsunamis? How are they related to hurricanes? If they have that knowledge, you don't want to start there again. And then the whole idea of mental models, and that's kind of sophisticated and it's hard to determine people's mental models, but what we know about mental models is that you don't change them unless you bring them to the surface. And when you need to do that is during diagnostic assessment. So what causes wind? People, our elementary students will come in and they will have all these ideas because they've observed wind and they have ideas about what causes it. Well, we need to bring those out so that when they actually get facts about what causes wind, they can go, oh, I used to think this. I see, this is different. Formative assessment is assessment for learning. It enables you to continue learning, and it's conducted during the process. I've discovered that I really use graphic organizers a lot during this, and any of you all who are associated with Empire State Information Fluency Continuum know that we have put a lot of graphic organizers that we created in New York City up there ready for people to copy, adapt, adopt. What I find with a graphic organizer is that I can not only detect a discrete maybe end of a skill, but I can see their thinking process. So if I've taught students how to develop questions, I wonder questions, I can use this graphic organizer to say we need different levels of questions. Yes, what, when, where, but also how and why and if. When you give students then a graphic organizer that leads them into that, you can tell immediately if they understand how to develop those different levels of questions. It's a pretty powerful way to assess what they can do, to look at their thinking process, but also to push their thinking process so that they are actually getting a robust understanding of the skills that we are teaching. And what happens is when we do a whole class of these, we're able to see, okay, do I need to reteach? Do we need more practice? Maybe next time we encounter these same students, we'll do the same thing with a different topic and just make sure they have a chance to practice it and understand how to ask good questions. The last thing I wanted to talk about in types of assessment is summative assessment. We've talked a lot about that. I do work really hard to think of authentic summative assessments. I don't know who all is on here, but if you've ever had me in a university class, you know that I stretch myself as much as I can to think of what are the assessments that we can do on our courses here at Syracuse that will actually apply when you go out and become a school librarian in a school. What is authentic to the situation? Summative assessments need to combine content and process, and you need to have taught the skills in order that they can be successful in creating the final project. I think we need to be sure to align with the learning goals because not every project has to be a huge video production. It could be that you just want them to recall specific information or explain it or maybe to analyze it, figure out what are the pieces and parts of it. Or maybe you want them to confront multiple perspectives and to really challenge perspectives by looking at other ones. Or turn it into a totally creative, unique project, the transforming level. Or to create something that never existed before, which is the synthesizing level. The point is that you think about the level of thinking that is required and make sure that it matches what you're trying to accomplish with your particular learning goals and that every child can be supported to achieve whatever you're doing. Now, I have actually given students a choice of a couple of different levels, recognizing students are coming in at different levels. It's fairly opaque to the students, but I managed to steer them so that students who need to be challenged to reach the higher levels, that's the product, the summative assessment I steer them into, and students who are struggling a little bit, I want them to be successful, so maybe I offer an alternative that is not quite as high a level. The REACTS taxonomy is a document that is also available on the Empire State information fluency continuum, I thought I'd give you just a few examples in case you haven't confronted this before, so that you would understand the difference of the levels and the way to make it as authentic as you can. So the first level, which is recalling, it might be something, it's not just listing facts, but putting it into a format that causes students to think while they're doing it. So let's say they're accumulating facts on a social issue, but then they create two columns, the do's and the don'ts. That causes them to think about the facts and think about the impacts on the social issue. So it causes more thinking than just copying, but it really is pretty low level. It's recalling. The second level is explaining, and that's putting it in your own words. Students get extremely excited when they think about a format, a venue that they know in real life. So a CNN news report where they've done some research about a person. We don't want them to just copy it, but we want them to explain in their own words as they would if they were a news reporter. They will get engaged in the whole idea of that, and it'll cause them to put it into their own words and actually figure out what's important. What would a news reporter say? The analyzing, as I said, is breaking it down into its parts and how does it work. Students might be very interested in writing a letter to the editor about a local issue that they have researched, because they have to take a stance. They have to figure out how the parts fit together, what becomes more important than what their point of view is actually. And so they're supporting their opinion with particular details. I've had students writing a letter to the editor, and I found it extremely empowering for them. I also have had them writing letters to Congress people and to other decision makers, to the mayor. If you have scrutinized a local issue, then empower your students by enabling them to create a summative assessment product that is real. The challenging level, I don't know if any of you all are actually in middle school now, but boy, my experience in middle school, this is the perfect level for middle schoolers. They love to challenge everything. So structured challenges where we build it into the assignment, that's pretty good. One of the things that I know works, because I actually tried it, was the students were reading what we called then teen problem novels, and they were on issues social issues and personal issues, emotional issues that teens go through. That's a part of middle school and high school. So there are lots of novels that treat those, and sometimes those are a blend of fact and fiction. And what we found is that it was extremely empowering for our students to identify the issue in the novel and then research the actual information about that. And what was really neat was when they found non-factual information in the novel, and they were able to refute it in some kind of a format. Now, we used a letter to, we'll call them this Dear Abby type letter, where they refuted the non-factual. They presented in a letter to the main character of the novel. I know you are experiencing emotional difficulty after the loss of whatever, and if you do this, and they could actually state the facts that they had gathered in a personalized way, but it was based on evaluating the teen problem novel, which is a wonderful skill for them to get, to evaluate anything that they read. The transforming level is it's pretty empowering. It means they're creating a whole new thing. Often this is done in a group way. It helps to have the support of others, but you have to structure it well because students don't automatically know how to work in a group. So you have to be sure you support that. Being able to write and produce a segment for a morning news show like Good Morning, we did Good Morning Greece. Where they had researched ancient Greece, and then they were able to put it in the formats of different segments in the morning news show. And so they had to write those based on their research, and then they actually got to produce it and videotape it in costume with props, and it just made the whole thing come alive for them. So that's the transforming level. The synthesizing level is something that is entirely original, and that's pretty high level. I don't think mostly we aim for that level, but more and more we're thinking about history and social studies as leading to social action. I think that's a wonderful focus for us to think about. So I could easily see that if in your social studies class you're researching something that's going on in the community or a social issue, even a global issue like hunger, well, what might be a community project that our students could develop that would address hunger in our local community? There's probably nothing so empowering as enabling our students to actually make a difference in their community. It is not for huge numbers of people, and you would have to structure it carefully because it's not just that they're running out and running amok, but structuring that so that you have a really good community project. Your students will never forget that. That is a huge way to build empowerment through assessment. So we don't have very long. We're almost through. But I wanted to talk about we've talked about assessment for learning and assessment of learning and assessment before learning. But now I just wanted to reiterate what I have talked about. Assessment as learning, and for all of us to think about what we can do as school librarians and teachers to ensure that the assessment that we offer is a learning process that involves both trust and empowerment for our students and for our teachers. The kind of guidance that we can provide as we develop assessments with our classroom teachers, I think is going to empower our teachers as well. They're going to get excited about the type of assessment. And I actually found when I started using the REACTS taxonomy with the teachers in my school, it opened the door to longer-term projects, to substantive assessment products, and whole inquiry projects that hadn't opened before. So really, I was able to use assessment to open the doors of collaboration. And it built trust between me and the teachers as well as between me and the students. And I thought that that was so worthwhile, that relationship with teachers was solidified through the assessment product itself, which you actually don't think that it would do, but it did. And just briefly, this is actually the last slide, I wanted to just mention that assessment shouldn't be a dead end at any point, and that part of our job as librarians is to be sure that we know how to use any data that we collect through assessment to align our library program with what the school is focusing on, the priorities of our principal, of our teachers, of our parents, and of our students. Make sure that we're assessing what we actually want them to learn. It helps us understand our students reaching the benchmarks that we dream for them to reach. Are they reaching that level of excellence that we want students to attain? It does help us re-envision our teaching, and that's hard. It's hard when you assess and your students aren't doing well. What you really want to say is, oh, these students, they just aren't trying, when really it's probably that we need to teach in a different way or assess in a different way so they actually can reach our goals and what we're trying to get them to do. Assessment is also very powerful in telling the story of learning through the library. Now, we all know we need to advocate, but we can't advocate by just saying, well, research shows that when students da-da-da-da-da, because principals are just going to turn off to that. But if you go into them and you have a story of students who have just exceeded all expectations, and you can tell that story, that's pretty powerful. And that's going to remain with your principal and your teachers and your parents and actually your students. That kind of summarizing and lifting up the assessment results to show the impact on learning is very powerful. And you need to mine that and actually write down those stories, because you'll forget. I promise. I've forgotten most of the stories that I have. The ones I remember are the ones that I wrote down. So I urge you to do that. And it all becomes a part of advocacy, which is a sustained process. It's not a one-time. We don't just go in once a year and advocate. It is a continuous process, and we're not advocating for the library itself. We're advocating for the type of learning that happens in the library, and the proof, the evidence of that is in the assessment stories and data that we are able to connect. And this is also a very powerful way to advocate to parents, because there's nothing that speaks to parents so powerfully as examples of when their own students, their own children have shined. That's what it's all about. So we are really out of time, but I thought maybe we could just have a couple of questions, or if you have time, certainly. Any last-minute questions or pushbacks or ideas that you want to share? Well, I just wanted to say in summary, thank you very much for sharing your ideas with me and for engaging in this conversation about assessment. I think this is the beginning of a conversation. You've probably already had conversations about assessment, but I hope we can continue the conversation, because I think we have a lot to learn and a lot to share about it. So I appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Barbara. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I will be sending out a link to today's webinar recording as well as Barbara's slides. So have a good evening, everyone.